Hi, by then, Bill. It's Walker Deibel, and today I have Ryan Begelman, who's the founder and former CEO of Summit, but has had a tremendous acquisition entrepreneurship sort of career, and really looking forward to unpacking that with Ryan. Ryan and I recently got to spend a lot of time together, just in the acquisition lab, and Ryan just very quickly became one of like the most celebrated members of the community very quickly, and for good reason. So the reason I'm really doing this is to dig in and get all of the meaty lessons that he has. Ryan, good to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. I've been loving the acquisition lab, by the way, and love your energy, Walker, and just hanging out with you.
Thanks, Ryan. It's reciprocated. So let's get right into it. So like you went to Northwestern, right? Like in like through your early career, I mean, you were on a very clear sort of iBanking, path, like, Lehman Brothers, Deutsche Bank, Carlyle Group, like all these names, like you're checking all the boxes here right out of the gate. Do you want to kind of maybe start there and sort of let your story unfold?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, you're right. I took this very kind of traditional path to getting into the world of private equity. And I started off, I went to Northwestern. I started off interning for JP Morgan and then Lehman Brothers and Deutsche Bank, and eventually made my way into, investment banking internships. And then from there, I got a job offer at Deutsche Bank. So I graduated college, went to work for Deutsche Bank, did the whole like leverage finance, mergers and acquisitions kind of thing. Left there, went to the Carlyle Group, which is like a real estate private. I went into their real estate private equity fund. So it was about a $3 billion fund. And, it was a tremendous learning experience. And although it was hellish working in banking, working like just insane hours. And, but what was, kind of interesting, and what led me to the entrepreneurial path and buying companies and things of that nature was about, I don't know, maybe 2 years into Carlisle, I kind of realized I had this, kind of minor epiphany that I really wasn't that happy with what I was doing. I had kind of accomplished everything I thought I had set out to do in getting this amazing job at Carlisle. At the time, I think it maybe still is like one of the top 3 private equity funds in the world. And I think I was probably the youngest person they'd ever hired at that point, out of banking. I'd only worked in banking for 1 year. And I'd kind of like arrived, I had a Mercedes, I had a cool apartment, I had the big screen television, like it like looked like, I had bottle service at nightclubs and, could go to South Beach. Like I thought like I kind of had done the thing. I read the books and like saw the movies, and like, this was what I was supposed to, like, this was the dream. Right. Like, and I felt like stressed and empty and like not that satisfied. And but I started reading this book called Mastery, and then that led me to this other book called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And through learning about mental fitness, like how to relate to myself, the psychology of like the ego, and I started discovering that it's so much simpler to find happiness, right? Like you need the skill for presence, to be present in each moment and really like enjoy each moment, which is about like controlling your perspective. You need community. You need like deep relationships with a small handful of people, your friends and your family, and you need physical health. And of course, like money is helpful up to a certain point, obviously. And so I wanted to figure out a way to like make some money, enjoy the journey. And kind of what I was learning is that like, much of your life is like a staircase, and most of the life is lived on like the plateaus of the staircase, right? Like most of it's not in the climaxes and like the vertical portions of the staircase. And I had been basically living for the vertical portions of the staircase. Like I had been living to like get the, good grades, get into that great college, then get into that like top banking internship, and then get into that private equity fund that everyone wanted to get into. And like I was like living for like that next bonus and like that next car, and like that was like, it just wasn't psychologically rewarding ultimately. And so I had to learn like how to live in the moment to moment.
Wow, it's like the epitome of upward mobility, right? Like you got this ingrained in you at an early age, and you had so much momentum, that you made it straight to the top pretty quick. I mean, I'm not sure how old were you during that time?
I was 25, I think, when I started to leave Carlisle, maybe 26, something like that. So this is all like in a 3-4 year period after college.
Wow. Okay. So what did you do? I mean, you have this realization, and then what's the,
Yeah, so I started to basically, I decided I would need to learn skills, and those skills were going to liberate me, and they would allow me to do something that I was passionate about. So I had mastered, Excel modeling and diligence and underwriting and negotiation to some extent, and I wouldn't say really mastered, but I had gotten, relatively good at those things, having done like over 100 deals, at Carlisle and Deutsche and whatnot. And but like I wanted to learn like marketing and writing and sales, and I didn't really know anything about that. And so I started reading books on marketing and on sales and on like, what is how does like YouTube work, and how do newsletters work, and how does media work, and I was reading this publication, this email newsletter called BizNow, and I kind of fell in love with it. It was about commercial real estate, and I was starting to realize that I really needed to network as well. Because I think one thing I learned early is like a lot of your opportunities just come serendipitously. Like they can't really be predicted. And so I started to go about networking and building community around me like as rigorously as I had attacked getting into like my banking and private equity jobs. So every day I would do like 2 or 3 breakfasts with different people, like early in the morning. I'd go have lunch with somebody, and then I would leave in the night, and I'd go to like 3 or 4 networking events each night. And I was just meeting tons of people, asking them, what do you do? How do you do it? And then the next thing I started doing is I started cold emailing people who I didn't know, total strangers, who were founders or CEOs of companies that I thought were kind of interesting, and saying, hey, I'm this like random guy, Ryan Begelman. Would you be my mentor? I figured out that like that really appealed to like older people who were super successful, that they were like willing to give back.
hmm.
And basically all I want is like a 30-minute coffee with you. And can I come out to your office? Like sometimes I'd even lie and say, I'm going to be in your neighborhood like next week, when really I'm not, I'm just like going to be around the corner. Like, could I stop by on Tuesday? I'm there from this, 3 to 7. And so I just started picking all these people's brains, learning like, what are the margins on your business? How does it work? How did you start? How do you make a sale? What does it mean? Like, what is your product like offering? And at the time, like there weren't as many resources for finding that out online as maybe there are now. This is like in 07, 06. And anyway, so I'm reading.
Can I jump in? Like, can you give us just a couple examples of the types of people that I mean, there might be names we know, or they might just be like, I always imagine like the guy in the big house in St. Louis who just owns like 6 subways or something like that, like just the random like like who give us some examples of who these people were.
Man, I mean, so I would hit up like I made a list of like who are the most powerful, like business, brilliant people in the Washington, D.C. metro where I was living.
Wow.
And I just went down the list, like starting really even at the top. I went and met the guys who own the baseball stadium, the baseball team in town, the Nationals, huge real estate developers and investors. All the way down to like, just random guy who owns, like you said, like 3 apartment buildings out in Virginia, that I saw some random, like, I saw a transaction close, like that was listed somewhere. And I wanted to know all kinds of different backgrounds. So like, I went and met with venture capitalists and tech leaders. But basically what I found out to my surprise is that almost like most people will meet with you if you just are persistent. Like sometimes I would Google map their office because they didn't always list their phone number on their website. And they usually had a listing on Google on the map. And then I would call their office and say like I actually just did this a few weeks ago. I called this billionaire in Chicago, and he's actually, I think, like maybe the wealthiest person in Chicago. I called his office and I said, hey, is Mr. So-and-so there? And, the reception desk was like, yeah, like here's his assistant. Like I'll tap you into his assistant. And then the assistant gets on the phone and I'm just like, hey, this is Ryan Begelman. I'm calling from such and such. Is so-and-so in? Like I kind of act like maybe they're just there and they would just take my call, it's ridiculous. And sometimes they just like, because I assume like I act like I kind of belong in the club. Like they sometimes just patch me through. The other trick I learned is if you call people at 6 p.m. or 10, like right when their assistant leaves, then they sometimes pick up their own phone. And I mean, I've had billionaires pick up their own phone. Like there's this guy, Bob Taubman. He owns like Taubman Malls. It's like huge, like the third or fourth largest owner of malls in America. Like one day I was calling him. His assistant was always telling me that he won't, he's too busy. He can't talk to me. And I kind of had figured out the pattern. I knew that she seems like she left around 5:30. So one day I just called at 5:36 and Bob Taubman picked up the phone.
And what did you say? What did you say at that moment?
I was just like, hey, this is Ryan Begelman. I'm calling from BizNow. I don't know if do you read BizNow? No. Well, anyway, I was just calling just because we run this newsletter and I thought you'd be a great speaker for it. And by the way, how'd you get started? And I don't know, I'll just it's amazing how much people are very social, they'll kind of give you a little slack for a few minutes. And if you can then, bring up something relevant, or like I said, ask them if they'll just be a mentor, I found is kind of an interesting approach, because people generally are willing to give back who have had great success.
I mean, after meeting with all of these people and getting insight on all the different paths to success and all the different business models, I mean, what were the sort of decisions or big takeaways that you learned?
Well, one thing I learned is I definitely didn't want to raise venture capital, and I definitely didn't want to build a hugely scaled business, because while I was learning all this, I was also calling lots of people who were gurus in psychology and Buddhism and just happiness and well-being. And what I was learning is that the stress of growing at all costs and building 1,000-person organization wasn't really for me, at least. I mean, thank goodness there's lots of people who want to do that. But for me, I wanted to build a small, medium-sized business or a series of those businesses. I wanted them to be profitable in the first year or two. And so I was kind of figuring this out in pieces, but I knew that I needed a product that was capital efficient, that could be launched without a lot of money, that could be break even pretty quickly, but could scale, bigger and make millions of dollars in profit. But I wasn't chasing 100 million in profit. I was chasing 1 to 10 million in profit. And I was willing to be very patient about that. And I was learning about the value of compounding. There's compounding, on your money, but there's also compounding on relationships and trust. And if you just work at something and one small bit at a time, you get these amazing results in 7 to 12 years is what I've kind of discovered. Whether you're mastering a skill or building, you're becoming a well-known person in a particular network or community, you could accomplish this kind of gradually, and have really, rewarding outcomes. And so I knew that I wanted to do something like that. I also was learning that it's kind of, there's luck involved, in making, in making success. And so I knew that I wanted to take multiple shots on goal, which is really different than how the venture world thinks. The venture world thinks focus, pick one thing, one idea, and spend a decade obsessively going after that. And what happens is, of course, is 9 out of 10 of them fail, because they burn cash typically. The initial product offering often doesn't quite work, so they pivot, they burn through a lot of capital. And so I wanted to be able to take multiple shots on goal. And so I was really fascinated by these kinds of business people that I found who, like you were describing, they own a franchise, they have some real estate, they bought 1 or 2 HVAC companies, and they have this kind of strange amalgamation of things and activities. And some of them fail and some of them, work for a while, and then in the next recession, they're not doing so well. But because they have this kind of diverse portfolio, and because they're learning a variety of skills, and they're building up a team that can kind of do a number of different things, they ultimately find success. And I think their chance of success is much higher. And so I was really curious about how to structure essentially like a holding company that could do more than one thing.
I love that. Absolutely love that. So, I mean, your first, you, all of this led to BizNow, right? I mean, was BizNow sort of like your first shot, or how did you sort of find your way to BizNow, and how did all of that kind of unfold?
Yeah, so I'm doing all this networking. I'm trying to buy real estate on the side. It started becoming obvious to me that real estate's very capital intensive, and I needed capital coming in because I wasn't starting with any money except for a little bit of money I'd saved from my first 4 years of working. And so I decided I should buy a small business that has cash flow that I could improve, ideally somewhat quickly, and I'll take the cash flow and I'll plow it into real estate. And so I was looking for companies that were small to acquire, and this is in 2006 and 7. And I was reading this newsletter called BizNow, and I cold reached out to them, which was something, as you can tell, I was doing a lot of. And I said, "Hey, I'd love to grab breakfast with the son of the founder, who was kind of like his co-founder, Elliott Bisnow." And Elliott said, "Sure, I'll get breakfast with you." So I went to breakfast with him, and I was immediately enamored with him. Like, he was younger than me, and he was an amazing salesperson. He was selling digital advertising in this like little email newsletter, doing about $1 million in revenue a year, very profitable, very high margin. With just, his dad was kind of the journalist and kind of the guy who had the idea for starting the company, and was like this amazingly well-known kind of local business leader who had created this really cool email newsletter. And basically the newsletter would come out every day. It would be about local business. And then Elliott would run around and sell advertising. And he was like maybe 23 years old.
Yeah.
And so I asked Elliott, after a few meetings, "Hey, would you and your dad want to sell me this business?" And they actually were interested in sitting down and took me seriously, which I was kind of thankful for. But ultimately they didn't want to sell me the business.
Okay.
And so I said, I came back and I said, "Well, what if I bought the rights to the business outside of DC?" Because I asked them some further questions. I said, what are your expansion plans? And they were like, "Oh, well, we want to expand to all these other verticals in DC. We want to have one for doctors and one for trade association, all these different, verticals in DC." And I said, "Well, like, are you thinking of going to New York or other markets?" And they weren't, because Mark was really a DC kind of big business player, and he loved DC and lived there, and that was kind of his focus. So I basically said, "Well, what if I did it? Like, what if I put up the money and I'll do all the effort and I'll learn kind of the product and I'll launch this thing in New York, and it'll be, kind of like a licensee of you, and I'll, or a franchise, whatever you want to call it." I didn't even really know back then what the hell to call this. And eventually they agreed to that. And so I formed
Wow.
I formed this new company, BizNow, LLC. Mark's company was BizNow and Business Inc.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, to the world, most people had no idea that there were different companies. It just looked like one company.
So,
Uh,
so was it a startup?
I mean, it was like a startup and an acquisition in a way, because I put money in to launch it, but I didn't actually purchase anything
Yeah.
from, like, I didn't really buy their existing stock. Instead, I formed a new company that is essentially a startup, and launched, and essentially, but I part of the deal was they would market, and Elliott would own a lot of this enterprise, and I would too, but I would put up a lot of the money, and it ended up that Elliott and I became friends, and he ended up putting up the money with me, and being kind of like my co-founder in this new endeavor.
So, but you
Uh,
kind of had like, it's like you like BizNow at the time had product market fit. You knew it was a profitable business. Like it had something to copy. And then what you did was identify the biggest growth opportunity that they were ignoring or didn't want to capitalize on, and you sort of like bought that.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, and they had plenty of growth left in DC, so I think it made total sense why they wanted to focus on different verticals there. There was frankly more growth in front of them than they knew, kind of like than they had time to capitalize on. So I basically helped accelerate some of that, capturing some of that potential.
Are you
And
are you willing to share the sort of like equity stake of the new LLC?
yeah, it kind of evolved, but essentially Me and Elliott owned a larger percentage of the company outside of DC. Mark owned the vast majority with the business in DC, with
Great.
Elliott owning a minority stake initially. And after a few years, it became obvious that we should combine the companies. And so we actually merged the companies and became essentially equal owners. It was actually a little more complicated. It was like a waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
So the first dollars out when we merged would go to Mark up to a certain percentage. Like, well, we took, I think, a third, and he took 2/3 of the first many millions out, so that he basically got a lot of credit for what he had started. And then eventually that would flip, and Elliott and I would get a larger percentage after a certain benchmark of profit. Not profit, but distributions.
Let me back up just a little bit and ask you this question. Like, off-market deals happen all the time, okay? But the thing is that in my experience, well, let's be clear. You didn't actually buy the company, right? You approached them, they didn't want to, and you sort of like worked it out. But like a lot of people aren't, how do I say, friendly or patient enough to take the time to build all the rapport, right? Like there was something going on here where you saw something and you were creative about it, but you weren't going in sort of like negotiating, like you were just trying to make something work. Can you kind of talk about like, what was your approach? Like, did it just happen organically, or did you kind of have an agenda, or like, were you just focused on rapport? Were you focused on working a deal? Like what was going on in your brain when you kind of approached BizNow?
So after I approached them and they weren't interested in selling, I started just showing up to their office at like after I got off work. And
Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
so I would leave work earlier than normal, and I would go to their office. It was like a subway ride away, and they were actually in this really cool like old Ritz camera. It was like an old camera shop that like had gone under, and they were in this like cool retail space, and I would go there and I would just help them for free, and I started implementing Salesforce, like the CRM, because they only had a spreadsheet for their sales. Like they had everything in a spreadsheet. And it was like they were really good at sales and really good at product, but they were really kind of mediocre at systems. And I sold myself as kind of like, I'm the systems expert, when the truth is I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. Like, I mean, you don't really learn operational systems at a private equity fund because you're mostly an investor. But I was a very like, curious, hardworking, diligent, like I learned a lot of like lessons from being in a really intense environment like banking. And I never heard of a CRM, but I was like, this spreadsheet thing doesn't seem right. So I started Googling and like calling people and asking like, I literally would cold call, same thing. I would cold call people to learn. Like I'd cold call the Washington Post and talk to their sales team and be like, where do you put your contacts? Like, when you get off a phone call, where do you keep the notes? And they're like, oh, there's this thing, Salesforce, we put it into. And I was like, okay. And so then I like called Salesforce and like, I was like, hey, how much does this thing cost? And so I started, and then, they would sell ads and they'd keep them in a spreadsheet as well. So like, when do you run, which ad at what time and which newsletter? It was all being done like in a spreadsheet. And I was like, man, we need to build a system for this. And so like, I was like, oh, there's this thing. I didn't know the words. Turns out there's this thing called ad trafficking systems, and so I started implementing things, and then their accounting was like also like in spreadsheets. It wasn't in like QuickBooks, or like, it was just kind of a mess. And so, because this wasn't.
Wait a minute. So they're letting you work for free and they're giving you access to their financial statements? Like,
yeah, well,
there's like a secret sauce here that I'm missing. That's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I earned trust, like initially, they didn't show me their accounting day one. Like day one, I helped them with their sales. And I started, I also would make them introductions because I was networking. I started learning the sales process from them.
How long was this time? Like when you kind of just started showing up and like hanging out by the water cooler and then start doing stuff. And now like they're showing you financial statements and you're implementing QuickBooks. I mean,
probably like 6 months.
Okay.
Something like that.
5 days a week. You're going to the office, just like.
I probably didn't go every day, but like a few days a week. And then if on the days I didn't go, I would go to networking events with Elliott, the son, who was doing sales. And I would shadow him. and I'd watch him work a room and get business cards and like see how he was building up his pipeline. And then at night he would write proposals out to all the people that he like met that night or he met earlier that day. And I would I would go and like read his proposals. And then I started reading sales books and started saying to Elliott, hey, I've got some ideas on how you could sell this a little bit better. And so I started iterating on what he was doing well. And just basically earning trust and adding value to them, which was kind of, in hindsight, kind of risky because, you know, if I didn't end up doing anything with them, I would ultimately, you know, have wasted time, so to speak. But I saw the time as an investment in my skill set. And that's always been kind of my mentality. I'll do anything to learn. Like, as long as my learning curve is steep, I'm excited about it.
Yeah. And so, okay, so what was going on there? What was your life like during these sort of early days after you guys kind of reached this arrangement to form BizNow LLC and you started going out? Like, what sort of, like, okay, here you go, you're going to go do this.
Okay, so initially it was extremely exciting because in DC, when I'd follow Elliott around, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. His dad was really well known. The brand was super well known. They had like, you know, lots and lots of readers. And it was like everyone was like willing to take a meeting, and people in DC are kind of, they're friendly. But New Yorkers are a lot tougher. And also it was 2007 when all this is happening. So the market was at an all-time peak. Yep. And people were just expanding business like crazy. So the ads were super effective. And so people wanted to renew and people wanted in, and like Elliott was a great salesperson. And so then I go to New York, I'm like 1/10 the salesperson that Elliott is. I'm not nearly as charismatic. I'm not nearly as good at positioning things. Elliott could spin off metaphors, and he was brilliant. No one knows what BizNow is. No one knows Mark Bisnow, the founder. Lehman Brothers falls. The recession is ensuing. We're running a commercial real estate newsletter. Commercial real estate's like literally leading the recession, you know, that and residential real estate.
Right.
And New Yorkers and it's way more competitive in New York. In DC, a real estate newsletter, they had a monopoly. There was no other real estate newsletter. In New York, there's been real estate newsletters for like 50 years or more. And the guys who run them are like often own a brokerage, like they're in bed with the advertisers on multiple fronts. So like no one wants to like advertise with me. And I'm just going to sales meeting after sales meeting, just getting rejected. And it was brutal. And I'm crashing on couches with friends to save money because I still live in DC. I'm still working my job at Carlisle actually, and going up and like doing this like on the side. And it's looking pretty bleak. Like, and then one day the guys in DC, Mark in DC he tried doing an event at like a steakhouse. Like it wasn't even like, I wouldn't call it a conference. Like it was just like one speaker giving a talk about like how he made his money you know, at a steakhouse. Yeah. And like 50 people bought tickets and came. And I was like, wow, I wonder if we could do that in New York. So I launched the first event in New York and it took off. Like people in the recession had time on their hands. They wanted a place to commiserate. And I booked some speakers and people bought tickets, and it was like a miracle. Like it was e-commerce. It was like people just showed up to the website. I didn't have to go to a sales meeting, and they just like sent me money. It was really cool. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was like a start. And then I went back to the advertisers and I said, see, the thing about selling advertising is you can buy advertising from me anytime. It's not like there's like a deadline. But with events, it's like the event happens in 6 weeks. You either get on board or you're not. And by the way, I'm talking to 3 of your competitors, which is a trick I learned. So like I'm only gonna have one law firm have a sponsor, one accounting firm, one lender. And that totally changed the sales game and my ability to, and I'm delivering you a physical audience. Like you can see the value of your advertising because you're going to actually, get a chance to speak on stage. And so that completely like changed the game. And it took a lot to get from there to doing like, 7 million in profit and 20 million in revenue. But that was like the beginning of something.
That's amazing. And so, okay, so what, what a great break. So, okay, And you're talking about these people that you're selling are the sponsors of the event, but you're also selling tickets, right?
We're selling tickets through a free subscription email newsletter. People read it every day for news. We put
Yep.
out we have journalists, and we write news. And then we write inside the newsletter, hey, oh, by the way, why don't you come to our event in 6 weeks? Click here. And you go to some landing page and you buy a ticket. And I made every mistake in the book in the process of this, and then I would sell the sponsorships initially and eventually, hired a sales team. But yeah, exactly. So you got it right. It's tickets and sponsorships.
Okay. So basically, okay, I'm processing here, but so basically there was no way for you to break in unless you absolutely thought differently about how to approach the market. Was anyone else in New York doing these sort of like meetups?
So I was so stupid. I didn't even really know that they were. The answer is yes, of course they were. And then these
Right.
things have been going on for, I'm sure 100 years in some form. Because I was so uninformed about it, ended up unique in different way in a bunch of ways, and how we produced the events, the programming, the nature of them, the way we did the chairs, like basically just everything about. I just questioned everything from like a beginner's mind. And so
Yeah.
like, I'd be like, well, why do the chairs have to all be facing forward? Why can't it be theater in the round?
Yeah.
Like an acoustic, like guitar
Yeah. Yeah.
concert. And like, why can't we play like, techno music as people are coming on stage and make it fun? And like, why can't we have a bunch of young people high five every single person as they enter the space and like psych them up and get them pumped up, like, for a breakfast event, like,
That's cool.
and so we came up with all these kind of shticky, kind of humorous, kind of bizarre, funny things. Like, I'd put in the bathroom little signs that said like fun facts about the local market or about real estate, and so like when you were peeing, you could read a fun fact from BizNow. Like, I just did silly things like that. We were kind of like the Southwest Airlines of like conferences.
So how do you go from running one event at a steakhouse to like 7 million in EBITDA, right? Like was it just New York, or like it multiplied across other cities as well?
So okay, so I'm still in DC, right? And I hired an expert on events. I decided, I'll some money started coming in. I was like, I every time I had $1 profit, I'd hire somebody. So I hired this guy from the biggest competitor in New York. I did eventually find out there were other events. I went to those events. I was like, oh, let me learn how these people do it. So I hired him, and I put him in this new piece of software that was brand new, like kind of new at the time, called Google Docs. And I'm like, hey, fill everything in this share doc, because that's how I was doing it. Every time you call someone and invite them to speak, put it into the share doc. And I want their name, their phone number, and the notes of what happened on the call. So we did this, and 6 weeks go by, 8 weeks go by, still no event. I was trying to host an event like at least every month. I'm like, why is this taking so long? Yeah. And he was basically calling PR people to book the speakers, and PR people take a really long time to get back to you. They're not really decision makers. They don't really have like the ear of the big people they represent, like day to day. They have to kind of wait for them to get back to them and stuff. And so it was just taking a really long time. So the way I discovered this was I was looking in Google Docs one day, and you can see the other guy's cursor. And so I'm in DC, and I see that his cursor hasn't really moved in like 2 hours in the middle of a workday. And I'm like, when I was doing this, like I'm constantly I'm calling like a person every 10 minutes and taking notes. So I was like, what, this is bizarre. Anyway, what I basically quickly learned is that I developed this rule. I don't hire anybody who's ever worked in events before, because they've learned like all the wrong lessons.
Yeah.
So,
like take 2 hours off in the middle of the day.
Yeah, they take 2 hours. He was going to like long lunches with like PR people and like working them and trying to get them to think that we were credible, so that their people will come speak. Mm-hmm. My approach, so I basically got rid of this guy, and I started producing the events myself. And what I was doing was I learned that I would basically hire really young people out of top colleges and train them, because they don't know that what I'm asking them to do is really hard and nearly impossible. And they don't know that it's like obnoxious and absurd to just call someone's office 4 times a day. And so I can just tell, but I'm just like, that's what we do here. That's the normal way to do it. So they don't know any difference. They don't know that we piss off PR people who find out later that we directly called the person that we should have called the PR person. That's the traditional way to do it. So like, I just was like, oh, that's normal. Just ignore the PR people when they send you nasty emails and are upset about stuff. Like, and so we would just call. And so we got to this point where we could churn out an event, like, from concept to the event being held in like 3 weeks, and deliver an audience of like hundreds and hundreds of people. On average, about 300 people would buy tickets. And we built this kind of machine. It took systems and a robust hiring pipeline. So I learned pretty quickly that what I did was I hired 2 full-time recruiters who are also young and don't know anything about recruiting. I teach them like my methods, and then we would basically built like an assembly line. So we have like the programming department that comes up with the ideas and like what questions to ask and what's like the right way to do the content. We have the production department that does all like the contracting and the hotels and the negotiations and the bagels and the lighting and all that jazz. We've got a marketing team that writes all the copy for the email marketing, and a sales team that sells sponsors. And I did all this wrong initially. I just had one person do all those roles and discovered that most people are not that dynamic. And basically I had to break it down and make it much more formulaic and like paint by number. And I was obsessed with data, like filling in every single call into Salesforce so that it got easier over time. So I could push a button and say, oh, here's a list of everyone that is in, retail real estate, who's in Midtown Manhattan, who's done a project in the last 6 months. Like I have all that data at my fingertips. But initially I had none of that. I just had to like call a lot and talk to lots of people and find out who is the most relevant person on this subject matter.
That's incredible. Okay, and then all the people that are buying tickets, it was kind of a business expense. So if there was an event every 3 weeks, of course they're going, right? I mean, like, money, the ticket price is no object. Like, of course I need to be networking, right? I mean, it's just
I think like you discover with the acquisition lab, there's riches and niches. The more niche you can make something, the more valuable it is for the customer. And so what we got really good at was I would build up a free email following in Brooklyn hotel real estate, and another email following in like downtown office Manhattan real estate. So I would have 3,000 readers who just obsessively care about downtown Manhattan real estate. They could care less about Midtown office real estate for whatever reason. And so I could then send them an email, and I could get the exact right speakers who just did the last big deal in downtown Manhattan real estate to come speak, because we have this aggressive team that's calling them constantly. And I've got this like, aggressive journalistic, force, and this great marketing. And I basically learned, like, it was like a very guerrilla tactic.
Yeah.
And I would basically deliver an event, maybe twice a year on downtown office. And then I would do, twice a year on Brooklyn hotels, and twice. So every 3 weeks wasn't the same event. It was like a different niche that I was attacking. And I basically figured out how to do that across 28 metro markets in the US, Canada, and eventually the United Kingdom. But I did it like bit by bit by bit, like brick at a time. Like I started with New York, and then I would fly to Chicago. And I did all this bootstrap, like no outside capital, no debt. We started with $46,000 roughly. Well, actually, we each put in 40, so about $70,000, but very quickly got to break even. And then every time I had profit, I would launch like a new, little kind of niche.
Yeah. So I mean, we probably should have started this whole interview with the fact that you bought a mountain. But let's back up. The question is, have you, like, doing all of this? Like, was your goal to build something to exit? Like, were you trying to go for a big exit?
No. And I wish I never sold it, which I did sell BizNow in 2016 to a private equity firm.
Okay, so how did that go down? Yeah, go ahead.
So no, I drew out at the very beginning this big whiteboard. We were so cheap, it wasn't even whiteboard. It was actually this like stuff you buy at Home Depot. It's like white tile that you put up it looks like white, kind of. It looks like a cheap version of white. Anyway, on my Home Depot white tile one night, I drew out my master plan, which was, I called the holding company Umbrella, like an umbrella. And I was like, basically, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to make one market, New York, profitable, and then we're going to launch another market. But eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to take the profit from BizNow, and we're going to go buy another company, or we're going to buy real estate, or we're going to start a new company. But we're only going to do things that can be profitable, like in the first year or two. and we're going to do things that are kind of capital light. Or if they're not capital light, we'll raise money in joint venture with other people, like if we do real estate.
And who's we? Like Elliott?
Yeah, me and Elliott. Yeah,
Okay.
me and
Okay. Got
Elliott.
it.
And so the idea was never sell, because when you sell, you have to start all over again and build your team all over again and build your cash flow engine all over again. I mean, the good news is you get a bunch of cash, hopefully, but you lose your team. And one of the hardest things to build was the team by far. Like, it was so hard. We hired, out of 400 hires, like 80 were really great. And it took so long to know who they were and what they were great at. Like there's like, I think there's that famous example. I think the coach at Duke, every year at the beginning of the season, he takes the rookies and he puts somebody up against the varsity team, but he puts the varsity team all in the wrong positions. He puts like the point guard at center and inevitably the varsity guys lose apparently, and the rookies, because they're in the right positions, win. And that couldn't be more true of business. Like, if I would take a great salesperson and make him a manager, only to discover that she or he wasn't very good at managing, or somebody who was great at project managing, to my surprise, couldn't human resource manage, or people who are great innovators weren't good executors. And so I wish I ended up selling BizNow for a variety of reasons, but frankly, I think it's great to keep things. And on the other thing too is compounding. Warren Buffett has made I think 80% of his wealth from 60 years old on. It just takes so much time to get your assets up to a certain point, and then they just multiply in a way that's hard for the human mind to even wrap itself around. So my plan was not to sell. I did think, opportunistically you could sell, because you've got this kind of conglomeration of things. And so if someone really wants to buy one of those 4 things you own, you could still sell that. And what's great is if you have multiple things going, it's a little bit easier to convince the buyers that it's not critical for you to stay. Or if you're going to stay, that you can spend some of your time on your other ventures, because you're already doing that and you've already established that. And you've built your team so that it can stand on its own, because you had to, or else you couldn't do these other things. And so that was another thing I kind of liked about setting things up, so that there was a kind of a conglomerate.
So why did you sell?
Mark Bisnow wanted to retire, and Elliott had been busy running our other company, Summit, for almost 7 years. He hadn't really been involved in BizNow for a long time, day to day. And so they both wanted to liquidate. And frankly, I would love to have bought them out, but it was hard to know that I would buy them for the right price. It was easier to say that an outsider had valued the firm. So, and it was also, I thought the market was hot. I was wrong. The market had many more good years left in it, but I thought maybe we were at towards the peak or something.
Yeah, towards the summit, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. And then were you approached, or did you actually run a process?
No, I took 2 years and very methodically set up the company for an auction. And I built the model, I built the deck, I hired an investment bank, but I actually did a lot of the work myself. I kind of discovered that our business, I wanted to get the best valuation. And so I put a lot of energy into helping the bankers make a really great deck that was really unique to our voice and our brand, and told our story really well. And I spent a year networking too, to get to know all the potential buyers. Ironically, the buyer isn't even one of the buyers I got to know. Funny enough, but it helped because it created more of a bidding war, because I had educated others who were relevant of why we were so special. Mm-hmm. And never saying we're for sale. I'd go to lunch with them and be like, oh, we never think about selling. I couldn't even imagine selling. But anyway, we're doing amazingly. You should get to know all these cool things we do that you guys don't understand. And then leave them, with feeling which was sincere. I mean, we really were doing things that were unique. So yeah, we sold it in an auction with a broker, essentially.
That's amazing. Okay, so how was the selling process though? Was it? I mean, obviously, you're kind of going in having experienced this before, but I just want to understand it from the seller side. A lot of times, when I work as an advisor, as a broker, it might you can just I've sold a couple of companies, and when your business is listed for sale, you just kind of feel like, like your fanny is kind of out blowing in the wind or something. You know what I mean? Like it feels like you're exposed in some way. Like, did you have this emotional roller coaster during that time, or was it, pretty buttoned up and?
A little bit, yeah. I had seen other companies go to market and fail and be like kind of like these like broken assets that like had a negative perception around them, even though they probably in many cases were actually totally good companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was worried about like a failed sale, which is part of the reason why I put so much thought and effort into it and took such a long time with it. I really wanted to have all of our KPIs together, all of our metrics together, like be able to answer every question in the book. I kind of did I would do a lot of testing along the way. So like I would go talk to people who could buy companies like ours in private equity or strategics and be like, what would you want to know to buy this? What would your questions be? What would worry you about the business? What would keep you up at night? Like, why would you not buy the business? And I kind of learned all these different reasons, the different kinds of buyers, oh, we're the kinds of guys who only buy trade shows. We hate media. We don't like advertise. We like this part of your business, but not this other part of your business. And so I basically got really good at answering and defending our company and coming up with and going back and looking at our data and being able to say, oh, I wonder if is that true that like we don't have good renewal, they don't like advertising because the renewal rate's lower. Is our renewal rate low? And I would go back and find out, oh, they're wrong about some of these things. And so I started piecing together this deck. I ended up doing 87 versions of the deck and, really iterating and getting really, really tight in my answers so that when our management team did management presentations, we were like really tight and could answer very succinctly. And one thing I learned is a lot of answers sound good to you, but are actually negative to the buyer.
Hmm.
Like you're like,
yeah.
like you'll be like, our culture is so unique, we built, and then they're thinking like, oh, that sounds like hard to keep going. Because like, if the management team leaves, like how will we maintain this really cool culture? But then other buyers might think that that's a great asset that we have got such a so I kind of had to learn how to balance how to present our company.
Yeah, let me ask you this question. So you went through this process and you've had all of the right background to lead a process like this. And it sounds like you were very driven towards getting the highest price possible, right? Right. And so the question is, now that you're buying, like, in other words, I know that, I don't know if you were in the deal that just closed or if you were just advising, but I know that you just were involved with an acquisition. And so my question is, how do you take the effort that you put in as a seller and sort of translate that to being on the other side of the table? I mean, you just assume like, okay, all of this is sort of like overpriced, and how do I, how do you make those two worlds come together in your brain? Or how do you approach sellers when you're buying?
I mean, I think I learned the important one. I mean, these are kind of obvious, but like I learned the importance of building rapport, with the leadership. In the end, we ended up selling to this company that we thought was going to be a better steward of the business. Honestly, like there was more than one buyer at the top bid in the end. But the buyer that bought us, I could tell was like a really like had a longer perspective. They were, they seemed just like kinder and more high integrity. It's funny. One of the other buyers like took our CEO at the time, like out to like the Caribbean and was like very sexy and like cool. But I got the feeling like they were a little more short tempered and a little bit more like anxious. And like, I wanted this other buyer that we went with that I thought was that was more kind of subdued and more like kind of Midwestern values, even though they're a New York firm. But so I think that that's really, important, how you present yourself and handle yourself with the seller. I think I learned a lot from this. There's one strategic that's bought like 100 companies that just put us through the ringer. Like,
yeah.
I learned a lot from that. Like they hired Ernst and Young, they had top flight attorneys, and they ended up not being the highest bid, but it was so interesting to just learn from them. Like they asked a lot of things so one thing I learned is I knew more about my business the day I sold than I'd ever knew.
Yes, totally agree with that.
I
Yeah.
kind of like the day I saw it was like the day I was like, I finally get it. Like, this is how this thing works. Like, because I had to answer so many questions I never considered.
We should start a
And
company where we proactively put people through, entrepreneurs through diligence, with just for like the realizations you'll have at the end.
100%. It was invaluable. I learned all these ways we could grow because they forced me to really think about like how we were growing and how could we continue to grow, and like why could we or couldn't we expand geographic into, foreign markets, or do all kinds of things that I just hadn't really rolled up my sleeves on. I think so. I don't know what else has that helped inform me as a buyer. I mean, I certainly learned a lot about also just reading my financial model and like, how to study the nitty gritty of a business. I think it's in some ways also made me just more of a careful buyer, because I've learned like where the rubber meets the road is like operations. And it's like, it's easier said than done, like really like
Yeah.
managing the team and running the company. And so
Yeah.
I'm very like, I'm wary. I wish I could go out and buy like 10 companies, but this has taught me that I probably should buy one,
Yeah.
like,
I think that's really good. I talk about that a lot. Like people are like, oh, I want to own all these companies. I'm like, do one, and like do one for like 7 years. Like hold back. Like just do one. So okay, so let's fast forward to this deal you just bought. I mean, what takeaways can you share from that experience?
well, the internet's amazing. And we bought like an online company, and it's amazing just how quickly this company has grown and how profitably it's grown. It was started as like a side hustle of a guy who's got a full-time job. And he did a great job of building this like this little online kind of like gifting business. And I I think I've learned the power of like, paid marketing too. Like it's not something I interestingly enough built BizNow without any paid marketing. It was all like kind of a lot of guerrilla tactics and growing our list, and a lot of
Yeah.
like referral and email marketing and using events and partnerships with trade associations. So this was kind of my first time really learning like Facebook advertising and things of that nature. I learned a lot of like just how to inexpensively put together your team that does the diligence, that does the forensic accounting, does the legal work. One thing I did that was kind of fun was structured the waterfall for the deal with the
Yeah.
investors.
Please talk about that. Please, like your deal structure was it was not unique at all. It's just unique to the application and the deal size. Please explain what you did there.
Yeah, so at first we were thinking about raising money on like how a venture fund would do it, like a pre-money, post-money valuation. And then we switched to kind of this waterfall concept of like how real estate works and private equity sometimes works, where basically we said to our investors, we bought it all cash, no debt in this case. So we said to our investors, we're raising $2.2 million and we're putting in a bunch of our own money, and we're going to be the GP and you're going to be the LPs. And when you put in your money and we put in our money, let's say we're putting in 20% and you're putting in 80%. After we each get our money back and a preferred return of 8%, then we are going to flip so that we are making, I think it then goes like 60-40, like we get 40% and you get 60. And then after we make you a 12% return on your money and on our money, then we go to us making 60% and you making 40. And it's kind of, we eventually get up a little bit higher than that. And so basically, as we all succeed pro rata, we as the people who are really running the business day to day get to participate in more and more of the profit. It's kind of like a sweetener for
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
We actually did it we actually didn't do it on an IRR basis. We did it on an equity multiple basis. So like once we make you like 1.5 times your money, then we get this much. Once we make you 2 times your money, then we get this much.
Why'd you do it based on equity versus IRR?
You know,
Internal rate of return, in case anyone doesn't know the term.
yeah, really, I think the best way to do it is actually to do it on like the greater of both. so that the incentives are perfectly aligned. I think thought it was kind of like a lot to explain to investors both of those concepts, and so we just simplified it and said it's just based on this multiple. I think people can kind of wrap their head around like, okay, I make 1.5 times my money, and if I do that, then you guys get an extra 20% or 30%. Like, yeah, that feels pretty good. Like, I've made a really good return on my money, and then once you guys make me 2 times my money, and then you can make more. And if you make me 2.5 times my money, you can make even more. I think people kind of like, and we said, we would cap our salaries at a certain amount, and we would really focus on distributions, and we would distribute at least as much money as anyone needed to cover their taxes was kind of an important point.
Yeah.
I found. And so I thought that just kind of resonated with people. It's kind of easy to understand. I find IRRs are kind of, people don't always understand what an IRR is because it involves time value of money, and you kind of have to understand compounding and things like that.
Yeah, if it's over engineered, it can be hard to sell, right? Because it's selling an investment. It's like, hey, okay, that's great. Can you tell us what Summit is? I mean, we didn't really cover what Summit is. It sounds like I didn't understand that Elliott Bisnow was in Summit with you. I didn't understand that. I didn't put that together.
Yeah, no, Elliott was Elliott, it was really Elliott's idea for Summit in 2008. Elliott had this idea, hey, why don't we get some entrepreneurs together? It wasn't really meant to be a business. And we'll ask them all these questions about how the hell to do what we're trying to do at BizNow. And so he started cold calling people. I did all like a lot of the operations, a lot of like the speakers, the accounting, like executing all the contracts, helping sell sponsors. Elliott would get all the people to attend initially. And so we founded this new company called Summit, which was basically gathering leaders of all kinds, entrepreneurs, academics, scientists, anyone who's like a leader in their field globally, for like a 3-day kind of like Burning Man meets TED adventure, where sometimes it's we buy out a cruise ship and we take people out to sea. Sometimes we do it on top of a mountain and we're all camping under the stars. We've done all kinds of different summits. It ended up being itself like a $20 million revenue business with thousands of people coming to our events a year. About 4,000 people buy tickets a year before COVID. And it's been this like really transformational community for a lot of people. A lot of people have met their spouse, their business partner, their capital, or had some sort of major like mental breakthrough in some part because of Summit. And as you mentioned, in 2012, we decided to build kind of like a permanent home for the Summit community year round. So in a separate company, in a separate joint venture, we essentially licensed the Summit brand to a joint venture, and we own basically half the joint venture, and we bought a ski resort called Powder Mountain. It's actually the largest ski resort in the United States by acreage, by skiable acreage. It's 10,000 acres. It's really big. It's bigger than Vail. It's got 7 lifts, but it was run by like this Mormon family that's owned it forever, very mom and pop. They were like real frontiersmen. They put up the first ski lift in Utah in history. And so we bought this kind of like vintage throwback kind of, rural ski resort and kind of like the middle of Utah. And that was really interesting.
Why did you do it?
We like skiing. No, I mean, we thought it would be really exciting. So let me step back. So in 2008, we were spending like $10,000 a month on office space. And we were spending, each of us, so we hired all of our friends, and all of our friends were spending maybe $1,500 a month on rent. And we were spending 10 grand as a company. And so we added it up and we figured out that like the 10 of us were spending like 30 grand or something like this, like a month. And so we was the housing crisis. And we looked on, I don't even know if like Airbnb existed quite yet, but we like, I think we went online and we somehow figured out that you could rent a house in Nicaragua. Like you can rent a compound in Nicaragua, like a drug lord's compound in Nicaragua for $30,000 a month. Okay. with multiple casitas, and it comes with like a cook even.
Yeah. Right.
And so we were like, we basically live like a bunch of like, we live like okay in DC, but we could live like real,
like drug lords.
Like drug lords. So we did this. So we sold all of our belongings. I got rid of my Mercedes, and we got rid of all our stuff, and we packed everything into one bag, and we moved down to Nicaragua.
I'm picturing the guy in New York. He's like, "Why are you selling your Mercedes?" You're like, "I'm moving to Nicaragua," and he's like, "Oh, good luck with that." Right? Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. So okay, so you guys moved.
So we get down to Nicaragua, and we decide we're going to learn how to be surfers.
Yeah.
So we wake up every morning at sunrise, and we hire like a local surf fisherman guy, and he takes us out on this like boat, and we go out and we start learning how to surf, and then we get back at like 7 a.m. from surfing, and we make breakfast, and we do sales over this thing called Skype, and there wasn't WhatsApp or anything at the time, and we were like making phone calls and running our operation, and we're running Summit and BizNow at the same time. Two separate LLCs, different companies doing totally different things, but we're learning lessons that apply to both. They're both essentially building communities of different forms. One has a newsletter, one has just events. And we were really having fun. So we decided we're not going back to this whole DC apartment thing and like having all this furniture and all this jazz. Now, in truth, I actually did go back and forth because BizNow had an office in DC still. Summit ended up being the one that kind of was the traveling camp. But
I see.
After Nicaragua, we actually rented this house that Ja Rule lived in for a period in Star Island off the coast of South Beach. It was actually on Cribs, this house. And these houses, by the way, they're not as glamorous as I'm making them sound. They're all like run down. They're all owned by like some rich person in like the 90s, and then like they got into trouble or something. One guy was like literally in prison. And, but we didn't care. We weren't living in nice places in DC anyway. So like now we're living this big kind of, home. And that allowed us to host people. People started visiting us. They heard about this house. Tim Ferriss came and visited and like wrote his second book from one of the houses. And all these like amazing, like it gave us this carte blanche to invite people that we admired, because we'd be like, hey, do you want to go surfing at our on our compound in Nicaragua, where we have a yoga instructor full time and a cook, and meet our team and hang out with us? Like, I guess.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow.
And so we started doing that, and we ended up spending 6 years living on a houseboat in Amsterdam, living in Tel Aviv, living in on a surf break in Malibu. Basically, we would set up camp for 6 months and basically become like the mayor of the local town. That was like our goal. We'd become like, we're like, oh, let's break into Hollywood. We'll get a Malibu house, an old broken down mansion in Malibu, and we'll host dinner parties. Yeah. And we'll have all these great people over, and and at our dinner parties, we got really creative. We'd have like a spoken word poet open it up, and we'd have a violinist perform. And we just started having all these people who were in the community kind of like speak and perform. And it was like this really cool, intimate thing. We would host these kind of events every weekend, and they were free. So people generally were like down to come have a free dinner with a bunch of cool people with like, a poet, and, maybe go surfing beforehand or whatever. So we were doing this. We did it. I mean, we did it in Austin and all over the world. We were doing this, renting a place for, 3 to 6 months. And then we heard about this mountain that was in distress, that had gone through bankruptcy and was in need of a purchaser. And we were like, huh. So we went out there and we rented a lake house at the bottom of the mountain. And we loved it out there. And we started hosting events, doing our usual free event thing. And we basically started telling people, hey, we're going to buy this mountain. And would you put up $1 million if we gave you a piece of land on the mountain? And little by little, we got 50 people to each say, sure, I'd put up $1 million if I could own a home lot and basically live the weekend experience I'm living with you guys as like a second home or even a primary home on top of this beautiful mountain. And have ski in, ski out, and raise our kids together and live in this kind of like communal experience. And so that we basically contacted the people who were selling the mountain and got them to take us seriously, which is kind of crazy that we would buy this $40 million mountain that costs another $100+ million to build infrastructure. It needs roads, it needs utilities, it needs new ski lift. I mean, it's a really expensive endeavor.
Yeah.
Um, and we kind of took this like leap of faith that we leased this lake house. We renovated it and turned it into kind of like a hotel. We built a spa at the bottom of this mountain, and we started hosting events. We put the mountain under contract. We put down a deposit, and we basically tied it up and started doing diligence. It took like a long time, like I don't know, almost a year, because it also had to be rezoned. And we had to get the locals to be cool about rezoning it and making it possible. And we had to learn a lot of lessons about, everything. Like you had to build a well to get water, a 1,500-foot deep well just to tap into water. So there was all kinds of crazy shit that had to get done.
Wow. I mean, like it's almost like you're tackling a very analogous project to BizNow, right? Like BizNow, you sort of like, you had an infrastructure, you had like an asset, you had a thing, and yet you took that and like summited a mountain with the opportunity. And it sounds like this is a very parallel kind of example where, you start, instead of going to the BizNow office and like installing CRMs for no charge, you're like, inviting people to surf in Nicaragua. And now, you've got this massive community. This is so cool. So, I mean, I have to wonder, like with all these different summits that you started running and all this stuff, like, I've got to ask the sort of like Steve Jobs interview question, right? Like, have you ever taken LSD?
um, I've taken mushrooms.
Okay, are you on them right now?
you know, uh, I
Is that
think
a story you want
more.
to share?
I mean, I think along the journey, I think we learned like the importance of understanding our minds and gaining more control over our minds, so that we're not just like automatically responding and robotically responding to our minds, which is frankly still how I spend a lot of my day, just in reaction, reacting from one thing to the next. Someone annoying my wife with my antics, and then like not knowing why I frustrated her, you know, and so over the years, I've been trying to develop greater and greater awareness and greater skill at being able to navigate my biases, navigate around being more patient, more kind, more caring, more gentle. And that I've learned is it's like mental fitness. It's like a muscle, and it's a craft, and you can get really a lot better at it through practice and through study. And I think to psychedelics are a way to accelerate that, no doubt, because it kind of shuts down the ego very temporarily, and so you have a brief couple of hours where you can actually um, see things more clearly. Like an example would be that you can see that being is often better than doing. Like you feel viscerally better when you're just tapping into your nervous system, just feeling how awesome the moment is each moment. How beautiful, right now I'm sitting in this room, I can feel the air conditioning on my face. I can hear the fan of my computer. If I just kind of slow down, um, and I can just kind of sit here and be with you as humans and like connect. And that feels like really like, enriching, when you take a breath. And so I think I've learned the power of that through meditation and through developing just greater presence. And whether you don't need to use psychedelics to accomplish that, frankly, you can just do that through practice. Frankly, like even just through walking, like I'll just walk a little more carefully, or when I eat my, food, I'll just like try to actually notice what the food tastes like a little bit more closely. And I'll immediately notice that my enjoyment increases. So yeah, those are things that I've found. Those have been some of the most profound teachings I've kind of had, or learnings I've had.
I mean, Ryan, look. I mean, you've got a. I mean, I mean, you've got a great mind, right? Like you're wicked smart, right? You're driven. Like there was no version of your life where you weren't going to like make a lot of money. Okay, like I mean, I guess you could have gone, left turn, but I mean, you were like on the on the iBanking path, like all the right things moving, and you just sort of took a left turn and wrote your own story. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, why do you do what you do, or why did you do what you've done? And like, how important, or how much of it was like the drive for money versus like something else? Like, what is it? What is the thing that is important to you? Why do you do what you do?
So I think you can choose your perspectives, and I've like chosen to kind of convince myself that life is like building like a sculpture, like it's like art, and you can create a very colorful life, and you can have like a positive impact on other people, and it doesn't have to be a billion people. It could be, it could be a few hundred people, and you can um, be very deliberate about how you approach your life. And I've tried to basically like remove the self-talk that I have in my mind all the time that's telling me like I need to be richer, I need more material goods, and I need something that I don't have now. I've got to go out and go get it, and like yearn. And I've been trying to like over time as I get older, like slow myself down a little bit and build things that can support my financial needs so that I can solve financial anxiety, because I think that is a very real challenge for people. Like a lot of us live at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, where we're just trying to like make sure our kids are fed, and so I by all means think people should make money. Like I think it's helpful to make a certain amount. I think that chasing too much money and doing anything in its extreme form will create some negative outcomes. And so I think we've been fed kind of like junk food heroes in like the fact that we like all want to read about, the Musks and the Buffetts and the Gates, who I admire and love reading about, but they live extreme lives and they have extreme outcomes. And that's why they're exciting to write about. But I think most of us actually could choose the middle way. Like there's like, there's this middle way where you live in moderation. And so I've been trying to very purposely architect a life that like has enough time for family and friends and enough time for personal learnings and hobbies and like, and transformation, enough time to be in service of others, because and that's for selfish reasons. Like it feels good to serve others. I think most of us most humans will find, but still enough time to like, make money and ideally if you can make money building things. For me, I've kind of trained my mind to be happy building anything. Like some of my friends can only build things that they're passionate about. Like they have to be users of the product or they can't like be excited about it. I could be running like a waste management company. Like I don't, as long as I feel like I'm doing something with people that I enjoy working with, and like I get to work with high integrity, high energy people, I can feel stoked about that.
That's awesome. So Ryan, what's next for you? What are you looking for, or what's the next summit?
Yeah. Well, maybe I should just go sit under a rock and.
I think you sit under the tree on the rock, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm looking for. So I'm in this new transition. I stepped down from being CEO of Summit earlier this year, and I'm totally free. So to do anything. So I'm looking for companies with like 300,000 or more of profit to acquire. I'm interested in building a company potentially, like probably an info product company like BizNow, like newsletters, online forums, something that's kind of creators would do, whether it's written or video or podcast or what have you. It could be a membership of some kind. So things like that are most interesting to me, but I'm open to buying other kinds of things too. Or building other kinds of things. And then I just recently started coaching some executives just as like an experiment to see if I like it. And that's been pretty rewarding and interesting. So I'm also looking for maybe trying to do that with a few more people.
How can people get a hold of you, or, where should they go if they want to learn more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I threw up this silly little website called ryanbegelman.com. It's Ryan, Begelman.com. And my email's on there. And yeah, I'd love for people to reach out. It's been really fun having people. I just put it up recently, and I used to kind of stay under the radar, but I've been a little bit more out there recently, and it's been kind of fun to see what people, what businesses they bring me or what questions they have. Or so yeah, I would love for people to hit me up. And I've been occasionally tweeting, so you can find me on Twitter too.
And I think like what's great is RyanBegelman.com is basically like the opposite outreach of you at 25 years old, right? You're like, come, let me help you, right? It's really exciting to watch that full circle. Ryan, any final words, any advice that you would give anyone who's, out there looking to, I don't know, acquire a business?
I mean, if I had some quick ones, I'd say pick up the phone more, email less, make your default your to-do list, not your inbox, so that you're doing things that are like proactive, at least knocking off a few key items a day. I definitely fall into the trap of like looking at my email when I get off a call. I wish I would, every time I got off a call, I would instead go to my to-do list. I learned the power of just not taking no for an answer and just trying and being creative. Like a lot of times you get no, but there's a yes somewhere in there. You just have to like with BizNow, I just have to change the offer. And that's been true for me many, many different times. I think, you can reach anybody, just like get out there and like hit them up on like 4 different platforms until they get back to you, and be persistent. I be wary of experts, including myself. There's always another way to do it. The experts are often wrong. Don't assume that big companies are doing it right. It's amazing how often that they're not, and there's like a gap left for you to take a piece of their market or disrupt them in some way. There's riches and niches. Take multiple shots on goal, because the first thing might not always work. BizNow had 10 different verticals. One of them was by far the most successful. Systematize things, and when you're replacing yourself in a role, be cool with 70% as good as what you do, because like some people will be 120%, but a lot of people are not going to be as good as you at doing whatever it is that or at least that'll be your perception. And just chill out on that, because like you won't be able to scale you won't be able to go do the next thing if you're like always micromanaging the last thing. Anyway, those would be some of my takeaways.
Wow, that's a lot. Ryan, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It was really great rocking out with you, and it's gonna be a great value bomb for the community. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.